What's in a name? That's something that we want to consider this week on Fridays with Phil. I'm Dr. Phil Mayo, and I'd like to share with you just a few minutes of biblical insight to help you along the way. If you enjoy the content, please be sure to subscribe. This week I was reading in the Gospel of John, chapter 17, the so-called high priestly prayer of Jesus, and I noticed something interesting in his prayer as he's talking to the Father. He says a couple of times, "I have made known your name to those you have given me." And I paused for a moment and reflected a bit on that phrase, "I have made known your name," because I would have expected him to say, "I have made you known." Well, he is actually saying the same thing, but the choice of words I find interesting, and I ask myself, what's in a name? It caused me to reflect not only back into the Old Testament, but also about Revelation chapter 19, which I'd like to look at today. In the Old Testament, of course, we see a number of times that people's names are important. Why they're called what they are called is usually due to the circumstances of their birth, or perhaps a promise that has been given them, or the expectation of a future that they will fulfill. For example, you have in the book of Genesis, Abraham, who is called Abram, but his name is changed to Abraham because he's going to be the father of many nations. Or you have Moses, who was drawn out of the waters of the Nile by the daughter of Pharaoh, and so is named Moses because he was drawn out. And at the burning bush, when Moses is told by God to go back to Egypt and deliver the Israelites, God reveals himself to Moses in a new way, and it is through a name, the name of Yahweh, I am that I am. In the New Testament, of course, when Jesus is talking about revealing the name of the Father, he's talking about revealing God's character and God's purpose. God is the God of salvation, and Jesus has come to show that. We learn from Paul that in Jesus all the fullness of the Godhead dwells in bodily form. He is the revelation of God. He is the revelation of the name. His name, Jesus in Hebrew, Yeshua, means salvation. He's also called the Word of God by the writer of John in chapter 1. Well, in Revelation 19, I started thinking a bit more about this passage about the rider and the white horse. It had been my intention this week to take a look at Revelation 20, but I thought it might be important for us to just pause for a moment and look again at this image that John paints for us. This is really very much like an artistic work through words that reveals not only Jesus, because it's clearly Jesus on the horse. This is the return of Christ being painted with words in a picture. But I also noticed that there are 4 times in this image, Revelation 19, that a name is mentioned for the rider on the white horse. And I thought this was interesting because each name reveals something about him. And there are also other parts of this particular image that ties together things that we've already seen in the book of Revelation. So let's take a look at it for just a moment. In Revelation chapter 19, verse 11, it says, "And I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and wages war." So a couple of things here. One, the white horse. We've seen this before, actually all the way at the beginning in Revelation chapter 6, when the Lamb opens the first seal, the first horseman of the apocalypse that comes out is a rider on the white horse bent on conquest who goes out to conquer. So this image of a white horse portrays the image of a person who is bent on conquest. And of course, this is what's happening here. It's going to be the conquest of the nations. Secondly, it says, "He who sat on the horse is called Faithful and True." This is in stark contrast, of course, to the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. Even his name implies deception. where we saw in chapter 16 in the sixth seal where three unclean frogs come out of their mouths, which are called demons that go out to deceive the nations and gather them together for war at a place called Armageddon, which is probably the same battle now we are seeing here in chapter 19. So deception is the rule of the kingdom of the beast. In fact, the job of the false prophet is to perform miracles and signs that deceive people into worshiping the beast. And if we go on here and in verse 12, his eyes are a flame of fire, and on his head are many crowns or diadems. The eyes are a flame of fire we saw in the vision of chapter 1 of Jesus. And here again, second time, and he has a name written on him which no one knows except himself. This is interesting because it kind of gives a sense of secrecy, of course, but I think it gives this sense of the fullness of the revelation of who God is hasn't really come to an end. It's just there are depths to it that we have not yet reached. There's another name here that no one knows except the writer himself or except God himself. In fact, Jesus promises to the church in Pergamum, where the first martyr Antipas is recorded and where he says Satan has his throne, he promises them a white stone with a new name written on it which no one else knows. So this connects back to that. And then if you go on to verse 13, he is clothed with robe dipped in blood. Now there's a lot of debate as to what blood this is. Is it the blood of his enemies or is it the blood of his own sacrifice? I tend to lean toward the sacrifice because one of the themes of the book of Revelation is that the way the armies of Satan are defeated, the way the beast is defeated, the kingdom of the beast is defeated, is through sacrifice. This is the irony or the upside down kingdom, if you will. It's the Lamb who looks as if he's been slain, standing in the midst of the throne in chapter 5. And it is in chapter 12 that the saints overcome the dragon or Satan by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, loving not their lives even unto death. So it's through sacrifice that that the enemy is overcome. And it goes on to say in verse 13, and his name is called the Word of God. Verse 14, and the armies which are in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, were following him on white horses. So again, this is the portrayal. We saw this earlier, and we learned that the fine linen, white and clean, are a sign or a symbol of the righteous acts of God's people. It is the same situation, of course, with the martyrs under the altar. It's interesting because the martyrs under the altar say to God or to the one sitting on the throne, how long, sovereign Lord, holy and true. So you hear that kind of ringing back here again, Revelation 19, faithful and true. Will before you avenge our blood on the inhabitants of the earth. And they are given white robes and told to wait until the full number of their brothers and sisters come in. So you see the white robes again being connected with the people of God. So these are the people that are following the rider on the white horse or the lamb are the saints of God, and in particular the martyrs. In verse 15 it says, from his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with an iron rod. I did a whole video a few weeks ago on the connection between Psalm 2, where this passage is found, and the book of Revelation. You can go back and take a look at that. This promise of ruling the nations with an iron rod is also a promise that's made to those who overcome at the church in Thyatira. Again, connecting the messages back to the earlier part of Revelation. And it goes on to say in verse 15, and he treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God the Almighty, which we saw at the end of chapter 14. Verse 16, and on his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So this is now the fourth name that he has, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So obviously it's a name that means all authority has given to him. This is the kind of title that the emperor in Rome might enjoy having as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. In fact, Domitian, under whom Revelation may have been written, enjoyed the title Dominus et Deus, Lord and God in Latin. So the picture that we get here is a beautiful one. It's painted with words that shows us that Jesus Christ is coming back with his saints to vindicate them and to bring an end to evil and to bring justice and righteousness to the earth. Next week, we'll take a look at chapter 20 in the millennium. Won't you join me? Thank you, and God bless you.